Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning into our second session of the GSV Cup Startup Academy. For those of you that weren't able to tune into our last session, based on feedback from all of you, we are doing the GSV Cup Startup Academy virtually this year as a series of events led by industry experts across EdTech, covering topics that are relevant to early stage entrepreneurs across people, product, and growth. So last month's session, we did a deep dive into B2B sales strategy, and there's a recording available in case you missed it. And then this second session, we are doing a deep dive on direct-to-consumer growth strategy. The program will be 30 minutes long, and then it will be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, which you can ask your questions at any point during the program by just submitting your questions into the chat box below, and then we'll get to them at the end. And just as a quick reminder, applications for the GSV Cup open up on September 1. And if you fill out the interest form, you will be getting outreach about that. All right. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce our two speakers who are both from two of the top B2C EdTech companies. With me here, I have Bob Meese, who is the Chief Business Officer of Duolingo, and Rohan Gupta, who is the co-founder and CEO of Quillbot. All right. Awesome. Okay. So Bob, Rohan, it'd be great on the off chance that someone listening here does not know your two companies, but it would be great if we could get a quick introduction from both you, just background, everything like that. So Bob, if you want to start, that'd be great.
Yeah, cool. So Alex, just a little bit about Duolingo and a little bit about myself. Is that right?
Yep, be perfect.
Yeah, so Duolingo is the most popular way to learn a language. And we're mainly known for our language learning app, which is now used by about 50 million people every month. And then now, since we IPO'd last year, we've increasingly articulated how we're thinking about expanding to develop the best education in the world and make it universally available. And so we have a second product right now in literacy. And for myself, I've been with the company for right about 6 years. So prior to Duolingo, I was with Google for about 8 years in total. The last role I had there was leading the games category for Google Play. And when I joined Duolingo 6 years ago, we had a great product and actually like pretty good user growth. The primary thing I joined to do was kind of like figure out monetization. So we were at the very beginnings of monetization for the company, and then we've built that. And then I've been involved in growing a number of different aspects of Duolingo and the business since that time.
Mm-hmm. Super helpful.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan, the co-founder and CEO of Quillbot. So we are an AI-powered writing platform on a mission to make writing effortless. We have about 25 million monthly active users, or nearly 25 million, about 5 years old at this point, and it's a pretty stereotypical startup story. We founded it in right out of university. My co-founder's a college dropout. Bootstrap for about 2 to 3 years, and then raised some venture capital and really scaled out the company, really focused on just organic growth channels. We are in the early days of monetization, but are seeing some really good numbers.
That's awesome. And I was just saying to Rohan before this that I run every email I write through Quillbot. So if you guys listening are not using it, you should definitely get on it. It's a game changer. But okay, awesome. Let's dive into talk about B2C growth strategy. So I think what's top of mind for a lot of early entrepreneurs when you're first launching, a new direct-to-consumer product, how do you think about balancing, paid acquisition versus organic acquisition in some of the earlier days? Rohan, if you want to start.
Yeah, definitely. I have a bias towards organic acquisition. I think it's a little trickier to get right. But in the early days, I think the vast majority of companies won't have great unit economics. They won't have figured out their sort of conversion rates and the ability to retain premium users. And that impacts which channels have healthy performance for performance marketing, right? And so as you get better and better at converting free users to premium users, for example, all of a sudden new channels kind of unlock. I also think organic channels give you better user feedback, which is quite helpful, that you might not be getting through your app directly. So for example, like Reddit, TikTok comments are really good for figuring out what users really think about your product or service.
And similarly on the Duolingo side too, I mean, I didn't play the role that Rohan played in terms of, I'm not Luis at Duolingo, I didn't start the company, but a very heavy bias towards organic on our side too. We now do a little bit of performance marketing, but it's like still a very small sliver. And so in terms of how we thought about it, I mean, just Duolingo launched on the app stores and on iOS in 2012. And so it was a bit of a different time, but there, some of the app store relationships. We also focus a lot on earned media as well too, where they're like, Luis is a really gifted communicator. And so they're just being out either in domestic audiences here in the United States, or a lot of our country expansion strategy was to find an event that we could speak at. And then that would actually like really light up a lot of international growth in a key way for us. And so there has been a strong bias towards that organic. Related to that too, just like continuing to invest in the product, where we didn't like charge any money for Duolingo when we started too. So it felt like foolish, like we really could not have done performance marketing in any kind of like capital efficient way at that time. And so it really was a huge focus on retention and user retention. And so what we've shared some of the story before, and people care about, for user retention, they care about like different durations. But in the earliest days, we were looking for like the fastest feedback loop. And so just looking for D1. And so we had shared, we're like, in the earliest days, we were like, I don't know, like low to mid teens D1. And then through just continuous iteration, we got that about 50%. And so that obviously has like massive gains to compounding for overall user retention.
Just want to double click there a little bit. Obviously, user retention is hugely important. What are some of those levers you pulled to increase that retention, especially thinking about that D1 retention?
Yeah. I mean, for us, there's some just mechanics so we run a lot of experiments. We're famous for running a lot of experiments. We're also relatively famous for a couple of specific mechanics. And so one is the streak in the way that we use that at Duolingo. That was introduced relatively early in the company's history. And so there, we really did encourage more people to build that daily habit of language learning. And so there's a lot of people who are like, they really care about the Duolingo streak. Streaks are a common mechanic in like a variety of apps, but certainly for Duolingo. And then complementary to that, to the streak, is we then invite you to turn on notifications. And so like the notifications and like the passive aggressive owl that we have as well too. And so these are there's more than just that, but if I had to reduce it to like the most important mechanics that help with that retention, those are some of the most important.
Yeah, on our side, we noticed the initial onboarding was a huge lever in D1, D7 retention. The way that we sort of described it was, for some users, it just clicked right away. They sort of got to that aha moment within, like a minute of landing on the app without any context. But by doing sort of nudges to users in the product, like bouncing tooltips, modals popping up explaining very important features, we just increased the ratio of new users getting to that aha moment, and thereby increasing retention.
And so you said, Bob, you're looking at D1. Rohan, it sounds like you're looking at D1, D7. Is there anything longer than that, or are those kind of the key time periods you think when really evaluating retention for early stage?
So I like to split retention into two different metrics: new user retention and current user retention. I actually Bob's nodding. I actually learned this from PM at Duolingo. And optimizing those retention rates separately is very helpful. So, for example, D1 to D7, I think onboarding is very critical. Just education is really critical. D7 onwards, actually driving a lot of user value is important there. sort of solving for the power user use cases is important. Just adding enough value where users want to come back to your product every single day of the month.
Yeah, just
go ahead, Bob.
to build on that. Yeah, because you can measure retention so many different ways. It's like it can you can cut it so many different ways. But to Rohan's point too, it's like less around like day 1, day 7, day 14, day 30, and we there's like new user retention and then current user, and we divide all of our DAU in a given day into 4 different buckets. And it's this is what we had described as like our user growth model. We certainly didn't invent it, but it's been really popular at Duolingo. And so like as a real quick explanation of that, like a new user is basically like shows up today and has not used the product previously. A current user is there today and is used for 1 or more days in the previous week. And then we have a reactivated user who was there today, not previous week, but previous month. And then a resurrected user who is there today, not previous month, but previously. And so the biggest group and the most important group are those current users. And that's one for us where we, in the current user retention rate is for somebody who's a current user today, what's the probability that they come back and use Duolingo or another service tomorrow? And focusing on like that specific metric, it has been hugely impactful for us. And so when we started working on this 3-4 years ago, that was like a certain number, and we've improved that quite a bit. And that's had a really big impact on our DAU.
That's amazing. You guys are just pros in this. Just taking it back a little bit, I know we were talking about with the first question of paid versus organic acquisition. Obviously, right, organic acquisition is preferable, cheaper. What are some of those kind of key channels? You mentioned some kind of going internationally and speaking, but what are some other key channels when you're thinking about really increasing that percentage of organic customers?
I mean, our single biggest channel on the organic side by far is SEO. I think if you figure out SEO, it plays every single day you just get users who are looking for your solution in particular, and if you can sort of figure out how to consistently rank for relevant keywords, as well as sort of expand the keywords that you can rank for, I think that can single-handedly drive, user growth in like the tens of millions of users. But at the same time, SEO is also kind of uncomfortable because you don't have that same control that you do with like performance marketing. And so I think it's really helpful to get from like 0 to 1 or even 0 to 10. But at that point, once you start getting resources, I would recommend diversifying your distribution channels. And then the sort of like guerrilla marketing that I think Duolingo is really good at, but like Reddit, TikTok, Discord, those are all very interesting channels that there are sort of canonical growth hacks for. And if you can figure out how your product, how you can push your product through those channels, for example, finding the relevant subreddit for language learning in Duolingo's case, or writing in Quillbot's case, and making posts that go viral in those channels can drive a ton of usage.
A couple of things on that too. Yeah, in addition to the things that I said, one thing that's really important too is it's not actually a channel, but it's more around getting the data. And we only started doing this maybe about 2 years ago, but it's basically like a, how did you hear about us? Basically like a quick question in the onboarding as well too, because that has been really impactful, because that was necessary for us to start doing any performance marketing that we could feel good about. But then that also helped us to quantify. It's not perfect, but it gives you like reasonable accuracy in terms of within your organic, what's the relative contribution of those things. And so, you may have seen us like kind of blow up on TikTok in like a pretty funny way in the last, like, especially the last, 9 or so months. And there with that, how do you hear about us survey, even though it's all organic, we're able to have like a reasonably precise attribution of like how much that's driving, which has been good. Another part too is we just always look at like, what can we do in the product that would drive incremental organic traffic as well too. And we have made Duolingo a lot more social over the years too. We don't want to be spammy, because there, we do send notifications, but we're really careful that we're like on the right side of the line in terms of being something that's a nudge without being annoying. And similar in terms of for new user acquisition as well too. Some of what we were seeing is we have shareable moments in Duolingo too, where somebody will hit a big streak milestone. I hit like a big kind of round number streak milestone yesterday, and just like sharing that out to people is
Can
cool.
we hear what the milestone was?
1,300 days yesterday. So that was
wow.
So there's a lot of employees that have big long streaks. Yeah, so that happens. But and just like looking for some of those things, there's like, I don't know, you hit like some random number, it's like whatever. But there are these moments that like they accumulate over time, and so just finding those moments where you put that out there, and then somebody else reacts to it, and it's like it's a reminder for them to acquire. And so the more that we can find some of these just like natural moments within the product and have that be a catalyst for user acquisition, we look for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great kind of segue into the next question of, you're both obviously direct consumer apps. What are maybe some features, the streak and the shareable streak being one of them, that can really, improve your, be it virality or network effects, just some specific features that you can build in?
I think one of the most compelling in-product growth loops is just share functionality or collaboration functionality. For example, this drove the lion's share of like Figma and Google Docs, their growth, because you would just, perfectly align incentives between the product, the initial user and the new user. Where let's say I have a Google Docs and I need my friend to review my document. I share it to a friend. They may not have a Google Docs account. They may never have used the product, but they land on the specific document. It kind of intuitively clicks for them. And you just have a really good chance of converting that new user into a current user.
And on this too, on the broader topic of social, because Alex, I think you asked about like virality or network effects. For us, we do really focus on like the core of just like building engagement as well too. And so I mentioned just the time that I joined, we had tried a couple of things in social and it had really not worked out. Really the unlock for us was finding the right kind of mechanic. And for us, it was in 2019 where we launched leaderboards. That was because prior to that time, we had social functionality that required too much effort. We were basically asking learners to like curate a social graph, largely of people that they knew in real life. And they were tended not to be at similar levels of engagement with the product, where the thing that we did then was we created this league functionality that we actually like, there were games that were implemented as well. And we looked at them for inspiration. And it was the core insight was grouping people who you didn't know in real life that had similar levels of engagement with the product, and doing that more automatically and giving you a new group of people every single week. And so that was, as soon as we launched that, it was like, it kind of immediately started working. And that was the first social hook. And then from there, then social started working and we started investing more. And so from there, then it was, I think in some ways like the V0 of social is like a profile. If you can't describe like an unconnected human, then it's like, what are you doing? So we did work on the profile. From there, we did these lightweight social interactions that we called kudos, where they're kind of like a high five for somebody who was like, if they were hitting that streak milestone, there's a whole bunch of people who were like giving me positive feedback for doing that. Is one around these kudos and like lightweight social interactions that we could measure. And then most recently, we've introduced a quest system that kind of builds on top of, there's like it starts with just like, okay, extend your streak. But then there's more things that we're encouraging people to do, either that will help them become more engaged with the product, or that will challenge them a little bit more from a learning perspective as well too. And so we feel like we have good momentum with social now, and we're rolling out more and more of these new features, and they're all working.
Yeah, that's a great point. And super helpful. I guess transitioning to a different type of social. I mean, I know, again, neither of you do a ton of paid acquisition. I guess, is there a right moment for when you do want to use that lever and invest in paid acquisition, be it paid search or paid social? And then would love to also think about how your strategy maybe around paid social has changed, obviously, with a lot of the changes going on, the update to iOS 14 last year. So yeah, would love to touch on both those questions.
I think with paid acquisition in general, you just want to be careful and know that there's a pretty clear ROI that you feel comfortable around. And I think with any sort of distribution channel, it's good to sort of diversify and have multiple distribution channels, because there's a lot of sort of events outside of your control, like a search update, or as you mentioned, the iOS update that can completely destroy a channel overnight. Yeah, but I would say when you get comfortable around and are able to properly monetize a given user, that's when I would start really exploring paid acquisition. And obviously, you know, how much cash you have in the bank plays a big role in that too. You know, if you're a very well-funded startup and you have like a CAC to LTV of 1 to 4, you know, I think paid acquisition makes a ton of sense. If you are a completely bootstrap startup and you have no premium offering, I would never recommend, paid acquisition. So,
I agree with all that. And a couple more things for us when we look at paid marketing. One channel that has worked for a number of years has been influencer marketing, and then influencer marketing specifically in countries where we have a little bit less of a presence. Because the biggest thing for us is just being able to see, just can we attribute the input or the spend to some outcome that we care about. And so there, for the US, for example, it's our biggest market, and our baseline is so high that it's basically impossible to be able to tell the difference for some of these things, versus for markets where we're newer, and then through, you know, by working with a number of influencers, we've been able to drive these really obvious spikes that you don't need to be a genius to be like, okay, that this activity is tied to this spike, and there's a positive ROI there. And so that has worked. And then in terms of for performance more general, we were slow, but we wanted, sometimes we even had the other thing of we have such the good fortune of having so much organic, but in some ways you even don't want to be like fully dependent on organic as well too, because, you know, you might have fluctuations there. And so we really have challenged ourselves to get, you know, at least okay at this muscle of performance overall. And there, I would just say to that point around, how did you hear about us? Basically just having clear attribution around it, and then making relatively conservative assumptions in terms of the duration for the LTV, right? You see some of these folks who are doing like 3-year LTV or whatever it is too, and it's like, oh man, that feels risky. And so we started off with like a pretty short window for the LTV of people who we're bringing in. And so that's there. And then maybe the last part, Alex, around with some of the platform changes that are happening, we had, I guess, the relative advantage of we were less dependent on paid marketing than most companies. And so we were less impacted than a lot. But part of it is just like some mixed shift in terms of, so as iOS becomes a little bit more challenging, then there's just a bit of a shift of spend towards Android. And we did observe that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so just quickly transitioning a little bit away from different acquisition channels. When you guys thought about, I guess, pricing strategy, and Rohan, especially interested to see how you did this at the early stage. I mean, I know you guys both did free or freemium. How should a startup think about, especially as they're trying to accelerate their growth, the right pricing strategy for their direct-to-consumer product?
I think there's a couple of different variables. You know, I only have experience with freemium, so you know, take my input with a grain of salt. I think there's a lot of benefits with freemium. I think being a sort of household name, really high brand awareness, really high brand love that comes from being a freemium product or having some free offering that solves the user's fundamental pain point and can retain a user for like north of a year. But the economics are very different between a freemium product and like a, you know, premium only free trial type of product. The kind of acquisition channels are different too. I think it's much easier to do organic acquisition for a freemium product. I would say if you have a premium only, I would actually recommend doing paid acquisition up front if you can get sort of like an instant payback period and can get that growth loop going. It also depends on your TAM and target demographics, right? Like if you're a heavy prosumer tool and you can charge a few $100s for a yearly subscription, premium can make a lot more. Premium only can make a lot more sense than freemium. Now, if you're targeting every single student, alive, freemium, I think, works very well for those kind of companies. And so if you're targeting like a relatively small segment of users that may not interact with one another as much, so you wouldn't have that sort of baked in word of mouth traction that you get with the student demographic. That's also another benefit or another profile where premium only makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, for me, we Duolingo had a longer period of time where we were like a totally free product than most. But at the time that I joined the company, we were a totally free product. And about kind of like 6 to 12 months after I joined, we started our subscription. And so we knew that we would do that. There's like a related, so we are very much freemium as well too. And there was a question of what would be our subscription, right? Like what would we put behind that? We started with like a very simple thing, which was we introduced ads. And so the subscription would get you removing ads. And then we had, which was since deprecated, an offline course content feature. And that was like mostly it. And then we had a third feature, which was like support Duolingo. So that was the extent of our premium subscription when we launched. And there, I would say in terms of pricing, it's important to know where you as a company are innovating and where you should just do like best practice. And so when we decided, we started off with a simple thing of just like a monthly subscription. At this point, we're now mostly an annual subscription, but we started with monthly because it would have a faster kind of feedback loop on all of that. And one of the things we looked at was just like, what are typical monthly prices for similar subscriptions? And that's kind of like a strong default. And then for us, since we like test all of the things, we actually did run a test where we test the monthly subscription at $3, $5, and $10 per month. And one thing that was interesting was, yes, there was more people were buying at the lower prices, but the total bookings for those was like really similar. And so that was something where that $10 per month at that time was kind of common. And we were getting that signal from our testing. And then we were also hoping if like, gosh, this first subscription feature set is almost embarrassing. And so we expected to like keep the price for the same for a while and continue to add more value to it. And so anyway, that was more of the path that we took during the early subscription days.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So we're about to jump into questions, but from the audience, but just quickly for both you, a little bit of a broader question, but so we've covered a lot of topics, right? We've covered paid and organic acquisition, retention, pricing strategy. I guess just broadly, is there something that maybe an aha moment you had or a mistake you made when thinking about like B2C growth or any of these topics that you're kind of willing to share in terms of, yeah, maybe I thought this was the right strategy around paid acquisition or organic acquisition and actually learned this from making this mistake? Anything like that you're willing to share?
I wouldn't say it was like a pretty egregious misstep, but not putting enough emphasis on engagement. I think, we were kind of focused on retention, but when we started viewing engagement as more and more of a North Star metric, that created a lot of unlocks for us. As we drove more engagement on our product, we naturally got a higher conversion rate, all things being equal. And it was just not an area of emphasis. I really wish we did that earlier. So.
That's great.
And then for me, it's a little, because it's less like user growth, but I was right in the middle of that monetization. And so there, maybe to take that briefly, in the end, we've turned into a subscription business, and it kind of like, but it was not obvious, and like maybe it should have been more obvious to me at that moment because we were testing across all of the ads and in-app purchases and subscriptions, and maybe I should have known from like the exact outset that like subscriptions would be the dominant business model, but I didn't at all, and so we tested through it. And maybe we would have been a little bit faster if we had more conviction that would be the right model. But I guess we tested and we found it eventually.
Yeah, I think that's a lot, right? A common theme, just a lot of testing and a lot of iteration. All right, well, thank you both. This is kind of the end of our program, and we're going to hop into the Q&A that's coming in live right now from the audience. So I'll just start taking through some of these questions. First one being, and Rohan, again, I think this is a little irrelevant, but for you, but when you think about acquiring those first, be it 10, 100 customers, like what did you do in those first few days of launching that product? How did you acquire those first 100 customers?
We put the site up on Reddit, and it went viral, and we got 100 daily active users in the first couple of days. But that was really insightful. Just those initial set of users, and what unlike a lot of products, we weren't necessarily like problem first. We just had this kind of technology, and we built. We kind of just packaged it and put it online, and we started seeing a bunch of different sort of unintended use cases of our product, and found out that it could actually, teach English as a second language speakers new vocabulary, for example, and that was really cool.
Yeah, that's just awesome learning new use cases for your product you didn't even know. That makes a ton of sense. So you both shared that TikTok, among other kind of social channels, is a huge channel for both of you. Can you talk a little bit specifically about how you're actually using TikTok as a growth channel?
Yeah, I mean, so the unlock for us is we have a really creative social media growth leader, and we just let that person kind of like run and do what they did. And the thing, we were a little bit it felt like we were late to TikTok, and then we started working with them, and we started doing one thing I won't share much, but like it totally didn't work. And then the thing that worked for us was when we started to introduce Duo, our owl and mascot, into it. And one thing that had happened previously is one of our co-founders, not Luis, had got like life-size kind of like costumes, and it was kind of ridiculous, and we didn't really know quite what to do with it. But it was that combination of whenever we had a creative person managing TikTok and this kind of like iconic mascot, and then just doing fun things around it, it just really seemed to resonate, because we weren't trying to be like big and corporate. We were just getting our owl in front of more and more people, and it really just took off from there.
Yeah, I love your guys' owl. Bro, this is a quick response to your insight about Reddit. Some people were saying that Reddit's a little bit tricky, and sometimes the subs don't allow brands to advertise their product. Is there kind of a trick there? Did you run into issues with that at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the key with Reddit is just being authentic. So, we weren't corporate, right? Like our first Reddit post, we really were not corporate. We're just like a couple of college kids, who had this toy basically, and we put it up on Reddit for feedback, right? And it depends on what stage you are as a company. But I think the key with all advertising is just to make sure that you're relevant to your target audience, right? So you're not posting on a subreddit that is not relevant for your product, and you're not positioning the ad sort of inappropriately or in a way that your audience would not actually drive value from, right? And so the way that we sort of viewed our posting on Reddit was like, hey, we're actually doing these folks a favor by telling them about our product, which was completely free. They can use it, they can get value from it. And at that time, we didn't even have a premium offering. And so for a lot of the Redditors, it just felt very authentic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bob, shifting gears a little bit. So you were talking a little bit about the testing you were doing, whether it's around, pricing or different paid acquisition channels. So, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of A/B testing. Is that right? So can you talk just a little bit more about how you run the A/B testing process?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, at this point, we're somewhat famous for it, where at any given time, at this point in the company, we have hundreds of concurrent A/B tests that are in different states of development now. And that can be, it's the scale is pretty different. It can be anything from a total redesign of the home screen of the app, which is one of the things we're doing now. And it's one of the bigger things, to just as small as like a copy change on a button. And so there's like very different magnitude of what we're doing. And part of what we do is we identify like high value real estate within the app. And then we kind of like go nuts on those things. And so we have a user growth team and area, and they focus on some of those things around like streak and leaderboard and notifications and new things too, but those are some of the bread and butter. And then on the monetization side to our purchase page, right? I mentioned some of our like earliest tests around like the price point. That was like the ancient days. But one thing too is, and also to the point of, don't reinvent the wheel for all these things. If people have a premium subscription, check out our purchase page. We've put a lot of time and effort and experiments into this, and we've kind of evolved to the point that we're at now. But it's been remarkable year after year after year how many gains we can continue to drive through some of these things. And so that's like the primary way that we do product development. Basically, every new feature that enters Duolingo does so through an A/B test. And it's really allowed us to be very effective and efficient with our product development.
Wow, that's good. And then how long do you run did you say this? How long do you run the test for?
So it depends on how long it takes to get significance. And so it's anything from a couple of weeks to sometimes months. So this one that's like a redesign of the whole home screen. It's like, yeah, that's going to take a little bit longer to push out. It's a bigger change. But it basically depends on significance.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then are either of you, so obviously, again, TikTok was huge. We talked about that a little bit. Do you still use kind of Twitter or Instagram, other social, or is it really TikTok kind of the main social channel for you guys?
We still, TikTok has been the highest performing this year, but one of the points that Rohan made too is just like, don't get overly dependent on anything really.
Yeah.
And so we're continuing to pay attention to, all of the top channels for us.
Yeah, our social strategy is a bit different than Duolingo. We're trying to get our branded social accounts to get even remotely close to the same kind of traction Duolingo has. We're orders of magnitude off right now. But we tend to take a micro influencer strategy on TikTok. We just like spray and pray, to be honest, and the kind of engagement and CPMs that we get, it's just obviously worth it. On our side, we don't have the same degree of precision on our attribution that Duolingo has either, but we still see the upticks in user growth and branded searches driven or at the same time as viral influencer posts. But yeah, my take is whenever there's a new sort of social media platform being developed, pay close attention to it because it's probably unsaturated. Like 2-3 years ago, TikTok was, there are very few brands actually advertising on TikTok. And if you were early to TikTok, that's where you could sort of get the most gains. Like, for example, Facebook and Instagram, I think, are very saturated. YouTube's pretty saturated. The CPMs are very high for influencers on YouTube relative to TikTok.
Yeah. Oh, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was a little late to the TikTok game as well, so I understand. But so we are almost at time. One last question is, you guys talked a little bit about when you were talking about the D1 versus D7 retention, really identifying those power users and starting to nurture those power users. How do you, I guess, identify a power user to start with? Like, how do you know, okay, now this is a power user?
We don't. Part of it is it just kind of, the way we do a segmentation sometimes confuses people because we just encourage people to build that habit. And that's what it is too. Part of it is even though we have a subscription now, this is related to the question, we think it's really important that people understand that we have a high quality free product as well too. And so we just really want to earn that trust with somebody, and that, but we don't like that. That's really kind of as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way you segment users, it depends on what you're looking for. So for example, if you're trying to identify like a core user persona for your go-to-market strategy, a good technique I would recommend is trying to find the segment of users where you have a steady state retention, where the sort of retention curve on those users flattens out. You can pull that segment of users out, start talking to those users, figure out if there's sort of similar demographic patterns, and then target those users. You can split out power users by engagement, who's using your site for 5 hours a day, every single day a week, who's using your product 5 days a week, days out of the week or days out of the month is really good. Raw usage is really good as well. It's kind of whatever you define a power user as.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, okay. I mean, we are pretty much at time. This has been so helpful. I guess, is there anything, if you can put yourself in the shoes of some of these early entrepreneurs, right? Thinking about testing, launching a product, and really trying to achieve those network effects, that virality, and any kind of final words of wisdom either of you want to share around B2C growth?
Yeah, once you get to sort of 0 to 1, where you have like some semblance of product market fit, I would start investing in analytics pretty soon.
That's a great point.
That makes sense. And part of it as well too for Duolingo, just investing in the product has really been the key too, because part of what we refer to is just getting into like performance marketing and there just making sure that the product is solid. For us, I mentioned just the early retention, and until we had that, we just like keep iterating on that piece too. So just in product, hopefully you can get to the point where like the product is good, and then you start growing, and just investing in product just has these massive compounding gains. And we've found that too. It's like 10 years in at Duolingo, stuff is still growing really well. And it's largely because we've invested in the product and developing that trust and building more levers and growth levers as well too. And so it's even from the earliest days, build that culture around the product is the biggest area of investment for the company.
That's a great point as well. All right. Wow. You guys summed it up perfectly. And again, I know I learned so much from this session. So thank you both so much. Again, incredible insight, incredible experience to the top B2C EdTech companies. So thank you both so much. And thanks to everyone who joined. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you.